Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Daf Lamed Gimel, and we're starting about 8 lines or so from the bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Gimel. Yesterday we learned a memra of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, and the line that he had said was Chayed b'dalad dvarim upater b'galus, and we had applied it to a brisa that we had seen 1/3 of the way down on Lamed Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara is now going to take that memra, that statement of Rav Chanina Bar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, and apply it to 2 other possible locations. And the Gemara says, and this is where we're beginning from, 8 lines or so from the bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Beis, the Gemara reads as follows: Rav Papa Mishmei de Rava Masni La Aresha. The line of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, where he spoke about Chayev b'dalad dvarim upater migalus, he applies that to the Resha of our brisa, not to the Seifa where we applied it. Which part of the brisa does he apply it to? The original brisa can be found 1/3 of the way down. We're quoting it here, 7 lines from the bottom. Hanichnas lechanuso shel nagar shelo birshus. If somebody goes into the property of a woodworker without permission, the nitzelo bikas v'tipchalo al panav v'meis, and he gets hit with a splinter of wood in the head and he dies, the halacha is that the bal nagar, the bal chanuso, is going to be pater. And Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, when we say pater, what are we talking about? Is he pater from everything? And here is where, this is our second approach, here is where we apply the memra of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, he's pater from galus. This is considered to be a case of shogeg, and the din is that he's chayiv with arba dvarim, but pater from galus. Says the Gemara, Manda Masni Lo Asefa, according to the approach we learned yesterday, approach number 1 of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, where it was applied to the brisa at 1/3 of the way down. So Kol Shekein Aresha, that would all the more so be true in this new application that we saw. But Manda Masni Lo Aresha Aval Asefa Kevan de Birishus Chayev Galus. There, because there was a higher level of culpability, he was there with Rishus, so that's really considered a shogeg. It's not a far removed isser of murder, and therefore he'd be chayav b'galus. Says the Gemara, that's really not true that he'd be chayav b'galus with rishus. After all, umi chayav galus. V'atanya, the Brisa writes, hanichnas lechanuso shel napach. If a person walks into the store of a blacksmith, v'nis zen nitzotos, and there were some sparks, he was hammering metal, which is a typical activity of a blacksmith. We've all seen the movies of somebody hitting a hammer on a boiling hot anvil out of the movies. So he's sitting there and he hits it, and a piece of metal or a spark spins off of the blade that he's hitting, the tafchalo al panav b'meis, and it kills the visitor. The Gemara says pater, the bal napach, the bal achanus is going to be pater. And what do we see over here? The afilu nichnas birishus. Here, in the case of the napach, we see that he's nichnas birshus, and he is going to be pater. Yet in our case, when we saw by the nagar, there by the carpenter, we said he's chayiv. So which one is it? Do we say that there's a chiyuv galus only by the nagar, but not by the napach? Yes or no? The Gemara says hacha b'maya skinan. What are we dealing with in our case? In the case of the nagar, in the case of the carpenter, we're talking about b'shulya. In the case of the nafcha, the person who was a blacksmith, we're talking about b'shulya de nafcha. We're only talking about a case of the employee or the apprentice of the blacksmith. Says the Gemara, who cares who we're talking about? L'maisa, if you know he's there, you need to have an extra level of care. Shulya de nafcha, the apprentice of the blacksmith, lemiktelakay, you think he's standing there just to get killed? The fact that he is your apprentice doesn't make him less of a victim. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be chayiv and galus if you kill him accidentally. Says the Gemara, no, he is the apprentice, but kisherabu misarhe v'bo latzes ve'eno yotze. This is where the master, where the napach, the owner, the blacksmith himself says, can you please get out of here? Yeah, I don't want you here anymore. Go take your time off. I want you to come back refreshed tomorrow. You're all done for the day. Please leave. So says the Gemara, how does that solve any problems? Just because the master said to his apprentice, it's time for you to leave. So therefore, if he gets killed, it's considered to be normative. It's not normal to kill anybody. Says the Gemara, no, don't worry. Kasavur yatsa. Really, the napach, the main blacksmith, the person who owned the store, he thought that his apprentice had left, but really he hadn't left. Says the Gemara, well, if that's true, then who?
Are we trying to bring a proof to the case of Rishus or Shaloga here?
We're trying to explain why the case of the napach, where he says that the person is pater, we're trying to explain why that case is different than our case of the nagar, where he's chayiv. He's here birshus. The Brisa says
he says get out. That he came in birshus, but he said get out.
Right, but his presence initially was birshus. So that's how we're teaching. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to come up with a scenario where there's rishus, but you're really pater from galus. So the Gemara is just kind of wet.
Interesting. If he literally said get out, it doesn't get less rishus than that.
There is less rishus than that. Less rishus than that is stama balabas. Yeah, stama balabas. So that's why the Gemara says, Kasav or Yatza, he thought that perhaps the apprentice of the blacksmith had already left. And then when he killed him, it was a pure shogeg. Says the Gemara, if that's true by a napach, if that's true by the, what's the word here? By the shulya de napach, if that's true by the apprentice, hihachi acher nami. Even if it's not the apprentice, if he kills anyone by accident, who cares if it's a blacksmith? So the Gemara says there's a difference. Acher, when we're top of Lama Gimel Lama Aleph, top line. Acher, when we're talking about a third party, someone who is not in the blacksmith business and he's not the apprentice of this napach. That person, Acher, les le'eim sadirabe. He has no fear of the master, and therefore, in that case, he'd have to be a little bit more careful. However, in this case, Isle Aim Sadarabe, the person who's the apprentice does have a little more fear because he works for him, and therefore he's more likely to listen. And therefore, when the master kicks him out, and the master actually thought he left, and he didn't leave, the master is surprised. Because there's Aim Sadarabe, because the apprentice should have had some yira, should have had some fear of his boss, and he actually should have left. So therefore, it's a bit less of a shogeg. It's like pretty far removed. In his head, the guy was gone. Because when your employee trusts you and when your employee fears you and you say, please get out, you assume your employee left. So it's such a low level that even though he was there, birshus initially, but therefore he's pater. But lemaisa, the din still stands, that we would assume, as we said on the fourth line from the bottom of Lamed Beis Mud Beis, that a person who is there, birshus, would be chayiv galus. If a person who was there, birshus, got killed, then the owner would be chayiv galus. Just in that rare case, he would not be chayiv galus. So this is the second application of the memra of the statement of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. And the Gemara on the top of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph gives us a third application as follows. Rizvid mishmei de Rava, masni lo aha. He says in the name of Rava, by the way, Rav Papa, who quoted the last one, was also in the name of Rava. Rav Papa and Rav Zvid were Talmidim of Rava, and one of them seems to have misunderstood their Rebbe, and we don't know which one was who. So the pasuk says in the Brisa, umatza, and the pasuk over here, if you look on the side, it says umatza esrei ehu vames. If the handle of the axe, when I swing one way or the other and the handle falls off, if it's matza esrei ehu, it finds a friend, that means that the friend was already there. Prat, what do we preclude from this? Prat lemamtzi es atzmo, that someone who shows up after the release of the top of the axe. So here's the flow of events. Let's say I'm on my downswing with the axe and there's no one in front of me. No one in front of me. I can't see anybody. And I throw the axe down to break. The head flies off in that direction. And a guy jumps out from behind the tree to try and surprise me. And the axe catches him right between the eyes. As far as I'm concerned, I took all of my responsibilities. Instead of me throwing it at someone and hitting him, I was throwing the axe when no one was in front of me. I did everything right. He jumped into the way, and therefore that's not a case where there's a chiyuv galus, because the action that I did of swinging the axe, unbeknownst to me that the head would fall off and then subsequently kill someone, is so far removed, it's really more like an ones. And therefore, if it's lemamti es atzmo, if somebody appeared out of nowhere, then the owner of the axe, when it's a case of a nashal habarzel, when the head of the axe falls off, so then the din is that he's pater from galus. And Mikan, says the Gemara, articulating the idea that I had just said, Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Mishi yatasa even mitachas yado, if I throw a rock, v'hotzi hala es rosho v'kibla, and I threw the rock next to a building, I threw it across let's say this is the face of the building, and I threw it across the face of the building, high arc, 1 foot from the building. And right then a guy sticks his head out the window and gets clobbered and killed. I'm pater, because that's mamtzias atzmo. He put himself into the line of fire after I released the rock. Fine. And then this is where, says Rav Zvid, that we apply the din, the memra, of Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, pater mi galus v'chai be'arba dvarim. In such a case, you're pater from galus, and you're obligated to pay arba dvarim. Says the Gemara, man demastin la'aha. Those who learn Rav Yossi bar Chanina over here by the case of mamtzi, and if you're going to say that you are pater from galus, kol shekena kamaisa, all the more so on the other cases which were even more lenient. Uman demasti la kamaisa, those who learn Reb Yossi bar Chanina in earlier cases, aval aha pater legamre. But here you'd be completely pater. It requires a little bit of time to compare and contrast all three of these cases to one another. The ideal thing to do is to lay out all three cases next to each other, draw charts, and really compare properly to see the various levels of shogeg. And just to be clear, because this is what we've already seen, shogeg is like a gray area. There's gradations of shogeg. So, for example, there's your classical shogeg, where I threw a rock without intention to kill and it killed. There's a shogeg karav lemezid, like we learned about yesterday, when somebody hits someone who's already on their deathbed. That is considered shogeg karav lemezid. And then you have cases like this, where a person's mamtzias atzma, which is the lowest level of shogeg, where you're pater. So for halachic purposes, it's really crucial to understand where all the gradations of shogeg apply. That brings us to the two dots about 10 lines down on Lamed Gimel, Lamed Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Tanu Rabbanan, we have a brisa. Po'alim, we have some workers. Shabo lispo ascharan mibal habayis. They came to collect their check. It's Friday morning. They've worked a whole hard week. It's Eretz Yisrael. They don't have a job on Friday. Friday morning, they show up. Bal habayis, I'd like to get a check. While they were there, v'nagchan shoro shel bal habayis, the person who came to collect his check was gored by the shore of the owner of the house, v'nashchan kalbo, and got bitten by a dog, shel bal habayis umeso, pater. The halacha is that the bal habayis is pater. This is the shita of the Tanakama. So a person X, let's say Reuven, goes to collect his check. He gets gored by the shore. He gets mauled by the dog. The halacha is that the bal habayis is pater for his death. Wow. Let's get into the Gemara. Acherim omrim, not everybody agrees with the Tanakama. Michael is one of those people. So is Acherim. Rishoyin po'alin lispo ascharan mibal habayis. A worker has every right to go knock on the door of his master's house to ask for his paycheck, and therefore, because they had the right to be there, therefore the bal habayis is on the hook for liability, and he'd be chayiv in these cases if his animal were to kill the person coming to collect his check. Says the Gemara, Heichidami, I don't understand the case. If this person is in the city, there really aren't a lot of animals there. So then, my time of the acherim, why would we say you're chayiv? And if a person's at home where all of his animals are present, my time of the Tanakama, that you'd be pater. So it says the Gemara, Lo tzricha, we're a third of the way down, just about a third of the way down on Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. Lo tzricha begavra de shchiach v'lo shchiach. Sometimes he lives in Florida, sometimes he lives in Chicago. Fine. So let's see what happened. The kari abava, the employee, walk over and I knock on the door. The kari abava, he calls out at the doorway, and meaning he knocks on the door. The amar lahu, and the bal habayis, who's sometimes home and sometimes not. This time he says in. He says yes. So we do this all the time. If somebody knocks on the door, yes, or we would say, who is it? Let's say in this case they say yes. So there's a machlokes about what this yes means. Do we say mar savar in ol ta mashma? Yes, that when a person says yes, it means come into the house, bruchim abayim, open the door. Or no, umar savar in means kuma duchtech mashma, stay at the door, I'll be there, I'll come open the door for you. So we have different languages in our language. We would say come in, or who is it? Come in means open the door. My sister says that when I knock. But if I were to have someone else knocking at the door in my house, I'd say, hold on, or I'm on my way, be there in a minute, but you have no rishus to come in. That's what the Gemara is saying over here, where we have this oddball scenario of the owner not being chayiv in the death of someone who comes to knock at his door. And why is that? Because, and Michael, this is the answer to your question. Why is it that if let's say if Reuven goes to collect his check and he knocks on the door of the master and then he gets killed by the master's, and why is he pater? Because he went into the house after hearing the word in. But according to the Tanakama, when you knock on the door and the master says in, it doesn't mean you can come into the house. It only means you should wait by the door. He misinterpreted the word in that the master said, yes, He interpreted it as come in ta ol ta, and that's incorrect. You're not allowed to come in, and therefore you entered without rishus, and therefore you're an idiot, and you're going to get penalized for it, or actually you're dead now. But the point is that in this case, there will be no monies to be paid to the yorshim, whatever the tashlumin is, no galus. And in fact, Tanya Kaman de Amar, we have a brisa that supports this shita of our Tanakama of in, that when the owner of the house says yes, it means kuma duchtech mashma, it means to wait in your place. De Tanya, the brisa writes, Poel shenichnas lisboa schara mi balabayis, if a worker goes into the home of his master to collect money, v'nagcho shoro shel balabayis o nashcho kalbo pater, afal pisha nichnas birashus. So what does this mean? He's nichnas bereshus. Says the Gemara, amai pater. If he was nichnas bereshus, so then why would it be that he's pater? Now it's the responsibility of the owner. Elalav, it must be when we say nichnas bereshus, it's that he did ask permission to kari Bava. He knocked on the door of Amar la lay in, and the owner said yes. Ushma mina in kumaduchtach mashma, that when we say yes in answering the door, it implies that you should not enter if you're on the outside of the door. And that's why we have our machlokas between the Tanakama and Achirim. And the machlokas is about when the owner of a house says yes after you knock on the door, does it mean you can come into the house, or does it mean that you should wait at the door? You got your answer.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Well, this isn't a democracy. So I would say vote at the next elections, but I don't think anything is going to change here. That's how the Mishnah clears the machlokas between the Tanakama and the Acherim. We have to figure out what the word means, halachically speaking. If I knock on your door and you say yes, I need to know what that means. By the way, you should always hedge and not enter, because that's just a smarter political move. But halachically speaking, what does it mean? So it seems from our Gemara that we paskin that in is stay in your place. I'll come get you. Don't come into my house just with the word in. That's an insufficient language.
In the first place, even if he says
You're adding elements to the sugya. When we have this is a pure in a vacuum. Whenever we learn Gemaras, we have to learn them with the details that we have. You're right. You should have locked this door.
And he was going to collect money.
What?
Instead of collect
No.
money, which is
Therefore,
more likely he's going right in.
more
Any
likely he's going to
opportunity.
want to go right in. Absolutely, he's going to want to collect his paycheck for sure.
That's hard to get.
Okay, it's like, I recognize your knowledge that you're here, it doesn't mean I'm letting you in. Right?
It depends where you live. There are some places where in means come in, and there are some places where in means wait at the door. It really depends. That's their whole machlokas, Tanakama and Acherim. That's literally what they're arguing about.
Yeah, but it's like an email that I sent the other day where they just replied receipt. Doesn't mean they're gonna do what I want them to do, just means that they received it, right? It's the same.
Could be. It's not a perfect mashal, but I hear your frustration at work. That's for sure. I definitely do. You have my empathy. I've been there. So that's the machlokas Tanakama and the Acherim in regards to whether or not when a homeowner says in, if that implies yes, you may enter, or please stay at the door. That brings us to our next case. It's not a short Mishnah, but it's a short Mishnah in Gemara, relatively speaking. It'll go until about 8 lines until the bottom of the page. Shnei shvarim, we have 2 animals. Tamin, both of them are docile. Shechavlu zeh ez zeh, and they hurt each other. Mishalmin b'mosar chatzi nezek. Whichever animal was damaged more gets paid half of the difference between the damages. So let's say Ruvain has an animal and Shimon has an animal. Ruvain and Shimon's 2 animals, they are just, I don't know, 2 horses are trotting and they weren't paying attention. They bumped into each other. One of them had a broken nose and needed an eye replacement. The other one just broke a tooth. So let's say one of them had damage of $300. One of them had a damage of $100. So the hefresh between them is $200. Chatzi nezek is 100 of that difference. That's what the Gemara says. Mishalmin b'mosar chatzi nezek. The person who lost more money in the damages gets paid chatzi nezek of the difference between the damage of Ruvain and Shimon's animals. And as well, shnehen muadin, if both animals were considered dangerous animals, mishalmin b'mosar nezek shalem. So then we have to look and see whichever the nezek shalem is more. Both animals were hurt, both animals were killed. So the bailim have to figure it out. My animal was worth 300, your animal was worth 400. So if the difference is 100, I have to pay 100. That's the nezek shalem. I have to pay the shalem of the heifers, the whole entire thing, not chatzi nezek, because they're not tam, they're muad. Because it's going to end up that they net have the same amount of money in losses. That's correct. They're going to take the same loss
they're equal.
in the end. They'll end up evening out. That's how the Mishnah. Not in the Chatzi Nezek case too, but there's half of the money never appears because they're tam. So by tam we never have all the Nezek payments, just Chatzi Nezek. So that was the case of Shneihen Muadin. What about Echad Tam ve'Echad Muad? Oh, now the case is getting a little bit more complicated. My animal's docile, your animal's crazy. So then, if Muad betam, if the Muad causes more damage than the Tam, then Mishalim Mosar Nezek Shalim. If the Muad, so then if he's the one that needs to get paid, then the payment is Nezek Shalim. Tam b'Muad Mishalim b'Mosar Chatzi Nezek. If there's more damage in the Tam, then the payment has to be for the Chatzi Nezek. V'chein shnei anashim, moving over into humans. V'chein shnei anashim, a little insulting that when animals fight and when humans fight, they're put in the same Mishnah, but I guess it's a little animalistic. I don't know. Maybe. What?
You deserve it.
So, umosar ha'adam min ha'behema ayin, ki ha'kol hava. Two men get into this. In this case, it's actually it doesn't matter what they do because Adam is muad la'olam, right? It could be accidental on the ice skating rink, and it also could be that you were in a brawl in a UFC match. And the Gemara says it doesn't matter. Mishalmin b'mosar nezek shalim. Whoever had more damage, we look at the hefresh in the damage, and the person who caused that hefresh in the damage has to pay that whole difference because Adam muad la'olam. That's why it's nezek shalim. So mishalim b'mosar nezek shalim. It says the Gemara, we're 2/3 of the way down. Adam b'muad u'muad be'adam. Let's say you have a man who injures an animal that's muad, or a muad animal that injures a man. Mishalim b'mosar nezek shalim. That's obvious too because they're both begeder muad. Adam is muad la'olam, and you've already self-proclaimed this animal to be a muad. So same rules as the case of two men, two anashim. Adam vitam be'adam. What about a man that injures a docile animal, or the opposite, a docile animal that injures a man? So then, if Adam bitam, if the man caused the damage to the tam, so then mishalim b'mosar nezek shalim. If an Adam has more damage, I should say, so then the Adam is going to get paid nezek shalim. And then tam be'adam mishalim b'mosar chati nezek, because the animal's tam and it's chati nezek. Rabbi Kiva Omer, af tam shechaval be'adam, if a docile animal injured an adult, a man, mishalim b'mosar nezek shalim, he too will pay nezek shalim. Tana Rabbanan, let's see what this machlokes of Rabbi Akiva and the Tanakama is all about. We're 3 lines before the wide lines at the open of the Gemara on Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. The Gemara says Tana Rabbanan ki mishpat hazeh ya'eh aselo. Says the Gemara, Tanakama explains ki mishpat shor b'shor, the halacha that exists between 2 shvarim, kach mishpat shor be'adam. The halacha should be the same between a shor and an adam. What's that? Last short line. Mashor b'shor tam mishalim chati nezek umuad nezek shalim. Just like with 2 shvarim, if you have a tam, then he pays chati nezek, and a muad who pays nezek shalim. Afshor ba'adam. The same thing would be true with an animal and who injures a person. Tam mishalim nezek chati nezek umuad nezek shalim. And this is where Rabbi Akiva argues. And for this, we're going to need a Rashi, because this line, if we would have known the Torah by heart, it would have been easier. And honestly, if I would have photostated psukim for you, it would have been even easier. The Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva Omer, ki mishpat hazeh kitachton velo ke'elyon, is like the lower one and not like the upper one. This is a reference to the fact of the kitachton, the pasuk that's closer to where I am, as opposed to the pasuk that's further from where I am. So what does ki mishpat hazeh kitachton velo ke'elyon mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is 1/3 of the way down in the Rashi's Dibur Hamaschel kitachton velo ke'elyon. Mishpat hatachton, the lower pasuk, mishtoi b'muad v'krakama betam. The pasuk that's closer to the pasuk that we're dealing with, our pasuk is kimishpat hazeh yaselo. The pasuk that's closer is talking about muad. The pasuk that's elyon, that's further away, is talking about tam. So that's why Rabbi Akiva says that even the tam in this case is treated like a muad, because kimishpat hazeh references the pasuk that's closer, that's referring to a muad and not referring to a tam. And Rabbi Akiva continues in his shita. Yachol yeshali minhu aliyah. There's a bit of a quirk here, which is that normally when we talk about nezek shalim, and we just said that kimishpat hazeh, when we have this case of shor and tam, that we're going to put it in the category of nezek shalim. Typically with Nezek Shalim, we always pay Minha Aliyah. We always make sure that every penny gets transferred over. However, under other circumstances, we pay migufo, whatever the value is of the animal. Even if my losses are greater than that animal, I don't have to pay the difference. So yachol yishalem Minha Aliyah. You might have thought in this case, in this rare case where we apply Nezek Shalim, that we also apply the rules of Minha Aliyah, that you're responsible for every dollar and not just the gufo of the animal. Talmud Lomar says, Rabbi Akiva, the pasuk says, Yaselo migufo mishalim, ve'enu mishalim Minha Aliyah, and that is how Rabbi Akiva formulates his answer that we saw at the end of this Mishnah, that he's mishalim b'mosar Nezek Shalim, but it's not Minha Aliyah. Says the Gemara V'Rabbanan, what does the Tanakama do with the limud of Rabbi Akiva? Hazeh, when the pasuk says Kimishpat Hazeh, Lamali, what do they do with that word? Says the Gemara that the Rabbanan used those words Lepotro me'arba dvarim, to teach us that you're pater from those four penalties. Rabbi Akiva, Lepotro me'arba dvarim minale. Where does Rabbi Akiva know that in this case of a shiur damaging a tam, that you're pater from arba dvarim? Nafkale mi'ish ki tain mum be'amiso. When there's a man who gives a mum be'amiso, ish be'amiso, only a man with another person, but below shiur be'amiso, not when there are damages between a shiur and between a person. Says the Gemara V'Rabbanan, what do the rabbis do with this? That says the Gemara, no, if that was all, I might have thought that that tsar would have been one of those things. I might have thought that he would have had to pay sheves and ripui, which isn't necessarily monetary. It's giving them time to heal. It's giving them off of work. Kamash malan, that they're pater from all four. Lemaisa, what we just learned in this brisa is the psukim that support Rabbi Akiva to understand his shita in our Mishnah. And what our brisa adds that our Mishnah doesn't add is that while Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that shiur b'tam pays nezek shalem, which is already unique, there's also a chiddush that even though it's nezek shalem, he's not paying min ha'aliyah, he's only paying migufo. And therefore he gives over the animal. And if the animal is less than the damages, he no longer has to pay the cash value to capture the difference between them. That brings us to our next Mishnah, about 8 lines from the bottom of Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Shiur shaveh maneh shenagach shiur shaveh masayim. My animal's worth 100. Your animal's worth 200. Ve'ein ha-nevela yafeh klum. But the nevela, the corpse itself, has no value to it. No teles ashur. He just takes the other animal, the animal that killed, as opposed to the animal that was killed. He just takes the whole animal. That's how we even out the scales financially. Masnis in money. Who is the author of our Mishnah? Asks the Gemara. It must be that it's Rabbi Akiva. Titania, the Brisa, speaks about this idea. Yusam hashor bebezdin divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel was of the opinion that you don't give over the animal. You bring it to Bezdin and find out its financial equivalent. Our Mishnah said that where there's a discrepancy in the cost of the value of my animal and yours, and my animal kills yours, I just give you my animal. But we don't have to go to Bezdin. That's only the sheets of Rabbi Shmuel. Masha'en came Rabbi Akiva Omer, no, huchlat tashor. It's the whole animal. We give over the animal, not the financial value of the animal, the whole animal. Take the reins, take the animal, goodbye. Take it, I killed your animal, and our animals are worth different things, and the corpse of your animal is worthless. Therefore, you can take my whole animal. B'mai kamiflage, what are Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel arguing about? Says the Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel savar that in a case like this, like our Mishnah, where it's shiur shaveh maneh, shenagach shiur shaveh masayim, the person who owes money is effectively savar bal chovhu. I'm just a bal chov. I owe you money. What do you want me to do? I owe you money. I'm sorry that my animal killed yours. And there is no halachic reason for me to give you the shiur itself. Really, v'zuzehu damasikle. Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion that he has to give over just the financial value. That's why Rabbi Shmuel says in the Brisa that we're talking about a case, Yusam Hashor Bevezdin, it just gets evaluated in Bezdin. However, they evaluate it, they look at its weight, they look at its overall value, color or strength, whatever the case may be, cash value. Rabbi Akiva Savar, no. What's the link between me and you and my animal kills yours? Shutfeinin, who were really partnerships. That's at least how we look at it halachically. And therefore, you have to give me your animal. You killed my animal, give me your animal, not financial value. It's a swap. It's not financial value. It's barter. I'm giving you, we're partners. I'm giving you my animal because my animal killed yours. And says the Gemara, this is fascinating. Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva have a machlokas about who this pasuk is speaking to. Look at this. We're 4 lines from the bottom. The pasuk reads, "Umachru es hashor hechai v'chatzu es kaspo." You should sell the shore and split it in half. Rabbi Shmuel savar lebeidino kamezaher rachmana. Rabbi Shmuel looks at this pasuk and says, this pasuk is talking to Bezdin. That's why Rabbi Shmuel says that when the pasuk says that it's talking to Bezdin, Bezdin has to establish the value. They have to evaluate the cost of the animal and say, here's how much your animal's worth, $2,500, and I, as the mazik, have to pay you that amount of money, or whatever the appropriate amount of money is. For Rabbi Akiva savar, no. The pasuk is not talking to Bezdin. The pasuk of umachru es hashor hechai v'chatzu es kaspo. Rabbi Akiva savar, 3 lines from the bottom. Lenizaku mazik mezar luhu rachmana. That was talking to the 2 of them, and therefore the animal itself has to be given over and not its value. The chatzu es kaspo, I only have to give over my half as opposed to your half. I killed your animal. Here's my whole animal to pay back. So the machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva is a question of literally who the pasuk is talking to. Rabbi Shmuel says it's talking to Bezdin. Rabbi Akiva says it's talking to the mazik and the nizak. My beinaihu. What's the difference between these 2 shitas? Says the Gemara. Hikdisho nizak ika beinaihu. The difference is if the nizak, the person who is damaged, is makdish the animal. Take a look at Rashi at the very bottom of the page. Dibur hamaschil hikdisho nizak ika beinayu Rabbi Yishmael lo kidesh. According to Rabbi Yishmael, he says lo kidesh because there's no goof of the shore that's shaykh over here. Only the money. You are makadesh something that isn't yours. Yes, nizak, you're deserving of money because my animal killed your animal. But you can't be makdish the animal that will be the dollar value for you. You don't own that animal. You only have rights to the financial equivalent of that animal. Masha'en kain, Rashi continues, Rabbi Akiva Kaddish, according to Rabbi Akiva, that the animal itself of the mazik is going to the nizak. Then if the nizak is going to be makdish that animal, then yes, in fact, it does then go to Hakdish. Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, Ba'amine Rava me Rav Nachman, Machro Mazik. What would be the din if the mazik sold the animal? Let's get the case clear. My animal killed your animal. My animal is still alive, and I sold the animal that I'm supposed to give to you. The Rabbi Yishmael Mahu, according to Rabbi Yishmael, where really I only care about the financial equivalent and not the animal itself, what would be the din? And the Gemara says on the last line of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, it looks like we're not going to get as far as I was hoping, but says the Gemara, Kevan de Amar Rabbi Yishmael Bal Chovhu v'Zuzehu Demasik Le Machur. Do we say that according to Rabbi Yishmael, we only care about the equivalent dollar value? The animal itself is not inherently valuable in my obligations to you because I killed your animal, and therefore Machur, that when the mazik sells the animal, it's considered to be sold. O Dilma, or perhaps, top of Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, Kaven de Mishabed Le Nizak Lav Kol Kemine. No, but maybe since the mazik really does owe money to the nizak, he has no right to sell this animal until he otherwise pays back the nizak. Says the Gemara, Amar Le, the response came in this case, because Rava was talking to Rav Nachman. Rava was 4th century, speaking to his Rebbe, Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman replies, Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, 2nd line, Amar Le, Eino Machor, it is not considered to be sold. Ay v'hatanya machru machor. Let's review our case. My animal kills your animal, and I sell my animal, and I'm in the camp of Rabbi Yishmael that I owe you cash and not the actual animal itself. Rabbi Nachman was of the opinion of Eino Machor, that you're not allowed to sell the animal, yet the Brisa says Machor, that it is. So it says the Gemara, you're right, it is considered machor, you are allowed to sell it. What Rav Nachman means is chozer v'govho, that you, the nizak, are allowed to go and collect that animal and take it for yourself. If the nizak is allowed to collect the animal that the mazik sold, lama machor, why then do we consider it to be sold in the first place? The nizak can just go and take it, no big deal. Says the Gemara, l'ridya, because during that time, the person who bought it from the mazik is able to use it to plow, and he doesn't have to pay for the time that he used it. He doesn't have to pay back anybody for that. The animal just can be recaptured by the nizak. Says the Gemara, Shma Mina. This has an implication that I don't like, says the Gemara. 4 lines down on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. This implies the loved that in the case of a borrow, umocher metaltalin, bezdin govin lo mehem. If I borrow something and I'm mocher metaltalin, and I then sell my private property, my movable properties, says the Gemara, it implies that bezdin govin lo mehem, that those properties can be recollected because really, I owe you money. So maybe you can recollect them from me. If I sold the metaltalin to somebody else, I can recollect the metaltalin that you sold from that third party. It says the Gemara, don't worry. Shiny Hassam, that case is a little bit different. The case that we were discussing, the case of the shore where we're allowed to recollect, when I sell that as a mazik, if I'm the mazik and I sell that shore, it kind of has the status of aputiki, which is that it's meant to be collected from by the nizak. And says the Gemara, wait 1 second. You cannot have the status of your shore to be an aputiki. The Amar Rava, asa avdo aputiki umecharo, that if I make my eved an aputiki and sell him, but balchov go behemenu, I can then collect on that eved, no problem. But the Brisa says, it's actually not a Brisa, excuse me, it's in the name of Rava, but Rava says, shoro aputiki umachro. Let's say that I made a shore into an aputiki, that it was set aside to make a payment, so that the nizak can recollect that item. Then ein balchov go behemenu. So here we have a stira. A few lines ago, it seemed to be that according to Rav Nachman, based on the stira and Brisas, that the nizak can go recollect that item, that shore that was sold. Over here, it seems to say in the name of Rava that you're not allowed to do that, that a shore, even when it's an apotiki, even when it's set up to be a collection for an item that was sold that shouldn't have been sold, how then does that work? A shore should not be an aputiki. Says the Gemara, let's analyze. Eved my taima, 8 or 9 lines down, Alamed Gimel Alamed Beis. Why is it that we allow an eved to be an aputiki? Because mishum de islay kala, everybody knows about an eved. An eved is a big deal. It's a significant purchase. Everybody knows about it. Says the Gemara, guess what? Hi nami, our case too of our shore, it also, kevan de nagach, because my shore killed your shore, kala islay. Everybody knows that my shore is now a muad. And in fact, it has a nickname in the community, the Torah Nagchana Karule. People call it the Goring Shore. Everybody knows about the shore that killed. Everybody knows. Stay away from that guy. His animal is a behemoth. We're not even going to let them get near it. There's nothing to talk about. He's dangerous. So says the Gemara, therefore, it is possible that Rav Nachman is right, that when a mazik sells an animal that he should not have sold, it's machor ve'eno machor. It's machor, it's sold in as much as, yes, the person who purchased it, the buyer, the lokeach, can use it, l'ridja, for plowing, but the nizak always has the right to recollect that item and repurpose it as his own. Next case, looks like we're only going to get to the 2 dots in the middle of the page. Says, and we'll have to just pick up the balance another time. Says the Gemara, Tani Rav Tachlifa bar Ma'arava Kame de Rabbi Abo. Tana bar Rav Tachlifa says as follows: Machro eno machor. If you try to sell it, it's not sold. We don't know yet if this is talking about the mazik selling or the nizak selling. That's going to be our analysis. But this line says machro eno machor, that if he tries to sell it, it doesn't work. And hikdisho mukdash, but if he tries to be makdish it, that actually does work. So the Gemara says, what's our case? Quarter of the way down. Machro man. Who is the one who actually sold this item? Ilema mazik, if you want to say that the mazik sold it, then machro eno machor money. We know that's not the sheet of Rabbi Yishmael. That has to be Rabbi Akiva. Hida amar huchlata shor. That's eno machor because Rabbi Akiva says you have no right to sell that shore. That shore is huchlat. The mazik cannot sell that shore. That specific shore, not its dollar value, needs to go to the nizak. So therefore, our Mishnah, if this brisa, I should say, brought by Rav Tachlifa bar Ma'arava, it has to be, machro and machar has to be Rabbi Akiva. But the problem is that the next words in the Brisa, v'hikdisha mukdash, if it's going to be mukdash, that sounds, as son Rabbi Yishmael, Damar Yusam Hashor Bevezdin. That sounds like Rabbi Yishmael, who says that it's considered a financial equivalent, and therefore you're allowed to commit it to Bezdin. You're allowed to commit it to the Beis HaMikdash. As son the Rabbi Yishmael, Damar Yusam Hashor Bevezdin. That's a stira. So we can't say that the Brisa that's brought by Rav Tachlifa is here in order to tell us anything other than confusion, because if you say that the mazik is the one who sold it, so then we're stuck, because it seems like we have two authors of our Mishnah, the first half like Rabbi Akiva, the second half like Rabbi Shmuel. And if you want to say Ela Nizak, you want to say that the Nizak is the one who sold this animal. Well, Machro Eino Machro, from the Nizak's perspective, money Rabbi Shmuel, that seems to follow the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel, and Hikdishu Mukdash is a son of Rabbi Akiva. No matter how you look at the brisa, either the mazik selling it or the nizak, we have a problem where the Reisha and Seifa don't agree. One is Rabbi Akiva and one is Rabbi Shmuel. So the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down, says, La'olam mazik v'divrei hakol. Really what we're talking about is where the mazik was the one who sold. And machro eino machor, when it says machro eino machor, really you're right. Rabbi Akiva should not say that that is sold. Afilu the Rabbi Yishmael, even Rabbi Yishmael would agree to that. Because even though the animal itself isn't obligated according to Rabbi Yishmael, but you're meshubad to the nizak, you owe him money. You should not be selling this animal. And hekdesho mukdash is afilu the Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, where the animal itself needs to go to the nizak, why would it be mukdash? For a secondary outside concern. Mishum Rabbi Abo. What does Rabbi Abo say? To Amar Rabbi Abo, gzera shema yomru hekdesh yotze below pidyon. That we don't want anyone to ever say that if you're makdish something, that you can deconsecrate it without actually paying for it, and therefore we consider it to be mukdash to some degree. Should we push to get a little bit further? I mean, are there others? You're good? If anyone has to daven Marv, I'm sorry. Okay, I feel bad. All right, we're going to have to push forward because it's going to make tomorrow impossible. Okay, so the Gemara says halfway down, you'll get the rest of the recording. My apologies. Tanu Rabbanon. The Brisa writes over here, this is a longer Brisa, a little sophisticated of a Brisa, a little difficult. And then we'll just touch one analysis and then we'll pause until tomorrow. So it should move pretty quickly. Tanu Rabbanon, the Brisa writes as follows. Short tam shehizik, a docile animal that causes damage. Ad shelo amad bedin mecharo, if shelo amad bedin. The Bezdin didn't paskin on the docile shore yet, establishing it to be anything other than what it is, a tam. So then the halacha is machor. If you tried to sell it at that point, then the sale is good. Hikdisha mukdash, if you tried to sanctify it and give it to the Beis HaMikdash, that works. Shachto v'nastam v'matana, if you shechted it and gave it away to someone as a gift, masha asa asui, whatever happened at this point after the short time damage, but before Bezdin paskined on it, everything that's done is done. However, here's the turning point in the Mishnah, in the Brisa. Misha amad bedin mecharo, if it was sold after the psak din on this animal, then eino machor. After Bezdin paskins on this animal, there is no functional sale. It's a mekach tos. Hekdesho eino mukdash, you're not allowed to do that. That animal has a din that was paskind on by Bezdin. Shachto v'nasna b'matana lo asa v'lo klum. If you shechted the animal and you gave it away halachically, you got to pay that back. You didn't accomplish anything there. That's unacceptable. And now let's add another layer. Kadmu ba'alei chovos v'igbiu. What if people who were owed money, people to whom you owed money, they came to collect. Bein chav ad shelo hizik, bein hizik ad shelo chav. Whatever the timing is of the chov, whether it was before or after your shore damaged, lo asav lo klum, they cannot take that animal, lefi she'ein mishtalim ela migufo, because in such a case we need the animal itself. They're not allowed to take that animal from you. You need that animal to pay damages. Muad shehizik. Let's turn in now in the Brisa to focus on a muad. We started with a short time. If we have a muad that damaged, then bein she'amad bedin, bein shelo amad bedin. Whether or not there was a psak din from Bezdin, machro machor, the sale is valid. Hekdesho mukdash, and if you sanctify to the Beis HaMikdash, done deal. Shachto v'nastam b'matana masha asa asui. If you shecht it and give it away as a gift, done deal. Kadmo ba'alei chovos v'igbiyo. What about people who you owe money to, and if they came to grab the animal, this animal which was muad lahazik, so then bein chavat shlo hizik, bein hizik at shelo chav, whatever the case may be in regards to timing. If the damage happened before the chov took place or not, masha asa asui, lefi ein mishtalim min ha'aliyah, because in this case it's mishtalim min ha'aliyah. When payments come for nezek shalem, in almost all cases, it's min ha'aliyah, it's cash value. It's not migufo, therefore the animal is available to be taken by the balei chov. That's the brisa. One quick analysis and we're done. Amar mar. Machor, when we said in the brisa, in the beginning of the brisa, by the tam case, that it's considered a sale, liridja. What that means is that it can be used by the buyer for plowing. Hikdisho mukdash, when we say that it's fully consecrated to the Beis HaMikdash, only kind of, mishum de Rabbi Abo, like we saw by Rabbi Akiva, that it's really not fully consecrated. We treat it that way so people don't have a misunderstanding that you can deconsecrate without payment, without some type of tmura, some type of switch. And when the Brisa says shachto v'nastam b'matana masha asa asui, that line requires analysis. Bishlama nastam b'matana masha asa asui l'ridja. I could understand what you're saying, that if I give over an animal as a gift, then it can be used for someone to plow. That I understand. However, last of the short lines, second to last of the short lines, ela shachto, if you shechted the animal, leisi v'lishtalim ibsare, give back the animal that you shechted, give him the meat, the corned beef, the shoulder, whatever the parts of the animal are, give them all back. Why would we assume this? Titania, because we have a brisa. Chai, the pasuk says, Chai, what is the whole pasuk? The pasuk says, Umacharu es hashor hachai, v'chatzu es kaspo. So Chai, ein li ela chai. That's all. It's only when the animal is alive. Shachto meinayin, if it's shechted, how do I know that that's considered reasonable compensation? Talmud Omar, Macharu es hashor mikol makom. So why does our brisa say lo asav v'lo klum in regards to an animal that's been shechted? Give me back the animal. I'll happily eat corned beef. No problem at all. Says the Gemara, and with this we'll close. Amar of Shezvi lo nitzrucha el lepchas shchita. All we're discussing here is a reduction in cost for the nizak. That's all we're discussing. When we talk about an animal, lo asav lo klum, it means that he takes a loss, that if the animal, when it's valued alive, is 100, and after shchita it's 80, yes, he gets back to 80. But he takes a loss on the 20. The pchas is absorbed by the nizak. We'll stop right here on the second of the wide lines on Lamed Gimel, Lamed Beis, and pick up in Mir Hashem tomorrow night back together. Wishing you all a beautiful night.